Mr. Chakrabarty, thank you very much for seeing us once again. Can you tell us why you think it's a good idea that China's become a member of the EBRD?
Well, I think it's a win all round, actually. I think it's a win for EBRD to have the world's second largest economy as a shareholder. I think it also allows us then to do proper business development in China, to try and get Chinese companies to work with us and invest with us in our country's operation. It's a win, I think, for China. This was the only multilateral development bank of which it was not a member. And I think it's interesting why it wanted to become a member of this, not just to complete the set, but also because we have a business model which is very different from the others, very private sector focused, with policy advice. And China's very interested in this business model as well, to learn from it for its own banks internally as well. And thirdly, and probably most importantly, it's a really big win for our countries of operation, because with that extra business development that we can now do in China, we can get extra amounts of investment into our countries of operation, not just in Central Asia, not just along the Silk Road, the new Silk Road, but also into Central and Eastern Europe, North Africa, Turkey. We think China is underweight in all of these economies in terms of its investment levels compared with where it should be, even though China has increased investment over the last decade in these countries.
And I've heard and read various reports. Is China to become a full operational member of the EBRD, or is this shareholding, at least at the outset, largely symbolic?
No, it's a proper shareholder of EBRD. It's a shareholder in the same sense as the United States, the United Kingdom. It's a shareholder. So it's a shareholder, but not a recipient country. So it will be a full member of our shareholding structure.
This really talks to, doesn't it, this big trend in what we call South-South trade between the emerging markets, which of course has been a real mega trend. It's about a third of all world trade now. What do you think is the scope in volume terms for economic collaboration which the EBRD can help to catalyse between China and the core countries of the EBRD, the countries of Eastern Europe?
On some estimates, Chinese investment, if you like, into Eastern Europe and others, about 40 to 45% below what it should be, if you look at the levels of development of those countries and what China's got to offer. Now, these models, you've got to aim off because there are lots of assumptions in them, but what it tells you is a sizable scope for additional trade and commercial activity between China and our core region, our traditional region of Eastern Europe. And the same would go for the other regions too that we work in. So there's a lot of scope actually to lift that investment. And I think China, certainly the countries of Eastern Europe, are hoping that EBRD can play a catalytic role doing that. Very interesting to see. You go to somewhere like Slovenia or Serbia, and you can see how much effort they're putting in to try and attract Chinese investment into their countries. But they recognise also it's a lot easier to do that through a third party like EBRD, a party they trust themselves very strongly. And so they're also therefore very, very keen on Chinese membership, having that benefit for them too.
I think I'm right in saying that about 1.4 billion of the over $9 billion that the EBRD dispersed in loans last year was at Central Asia. And of course, China likes that because China's trying to link up with Central Asia as part of its One Belt, One Road policy.
What has happened to Central Asia for EBRD is quite extraordinary. So we used to have this almost cyclical thing in Central Asia where one year up, another year down. But for the last 3 years, we've had this rising trend of investment in Central Asia, partly because some of the economies there have really, really gone in for reform in the last 2 years. Take Kazakhstan. Even before the oil prices went down, and it was obvious it had to reform to diversify its economy, it started reforming about 2 years ago. And so we have really increased our investment in Kazakhstan. I think the same would go for somewhere like Azerbaijan now as well. Because oil prices are going down, President Aliyev is saying, we've got to reform fast, EBRD can help. And all of these are opportunities not just for EBRD, but for also China and other investors too, to come in with EBRD and do that. So I think that whole set of countries where commodity prices has been their way through development, and the ending of that super cycle of commodity prices and what's happened on oil prices has given really an extra impetus, if you like, to investment from EBRD, but also other players in non-hydrocarbon sectors, and that's really the crucial thing.
Now, a lot of investors talk in general terms, if you like, about this new Silk Road. There has been an increase in interest among the mainstream media here in the Western world as well. To you, your staff here at the EBRD, as symbolised by this new China link up. How important is this theme, do you think, the new Silk Road? Is this just another investment fad?
No, I think it really is important. I mean, at the heart of it is this idea that one can reduce, through the Silk Road investments, the time taken for the transport of goods between China and Europe, if you like, and vice versa.
Rather than going all the way around by ship.
Exactly so. So you narrow you reduce the amount of time taken, and that's obviously a reduction in costs, and therefore it helps in terms of profitability of the investments. So there's a lot to do. Now, within that, whenever you have an initiative like that, it's incredibly important to prioritize the investments and make sure there are good investments, put together really well, and they're bankable investments. So already we're working on a number of investments. For example, in Kazakhstan, there have been a couple of investments on the road sector, and there'll be others coming forward as well in the coming months and years, really to link up the Silk Road investments, and we shall be playing a strong part in that. When I go to China, this is going to be one of the main topics of which are the sort of investments we should really be pushing forward as priorities under the Silk Road initiative.
Now, obviously, you run this entire organisation, but I know you take a close interest in some projects. It's a few months since I last interviewed you. Could you just highlight one or two projects in particular that you're most proud of, that you think typify where the EBRD is going, where you want it to go?
Well, I'm particularly proud of the things that are the hardest and things that in some ways are the riskiest, but are exactly what a development bank should be doing. So let me give you a couple of examples of what I mean. So I said earlier on that in the last 2 years, Kazakhstan has really turned the road in terms of its approach to reform and so on. So a couple of examples from there. The first wind farm, the first solar power plant, the new PPP law, which makes it much easier.
Public-private partnership
law,
yeah.
To make it much easier to invest in infrastructure in that country, and resulting now in a really interesting process for a ring road around Almaty, a huge infrastructure project. We'll be very much involved in that. We helped reform the public-private partnership law, a legal framework. That's some examples. Another one would be Ukraine. Now, 2 years ago, we were actually reducing what we were doing in Ukraine because of the lack of reform. The situation was very difficult, corruption extremely high, only working with the private sector. Last 2 years, we've increased massively, 1.4 billion euros year before last, 1 billion euros last year. Again, very strongly backing reform and reformers. Of course, there's a hell of a lot still to do in Ukraine, but they've made real progress, particularly in the financial sector. Much more to be done in the energy sector still. But we're working there not just with investment, we're trying to improve the investment climate too. So with the energy company there, Naftogaz, we've been working on a corporate governance action plan. I'm very proud of that sort of work actually. It's not just money, but it's also real, actually hard stuff in terms of reform that takes on vested interests as well. So a couple of examples really.
China, of course, has spearheaded the launch of the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. And of course the UK and then other EU countries were quick to sign up as founding signatories.
Sure.
How does, I know you're a big supporter of AIIB and we've talked about that in the past, how does EBRD, AIIB link up? What's the vision there from your office?
Well, fundamentally, why do we support the AIIB? Because the infrastructure needs in our mutual region of operations are so massive. There's no way that EBRD, the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank could fulfill these needs. So this new vehicle, this new institution can help us really try and fulfill those needs. That's the number one thing. Secondly, EBRD, because we were the last new kid on the block, if you like, we've been fundamental to trying to help the AIIB get its policies, procedures, processes, systems in place so it can function very fast. And that's been much appreciated on their side. Thirdly, I think it's very interesting for established banks like ourselves to see a new bank without yet the baggage, if you like, the old banks have, to see if they can actually reform themselves, do things which are faster while sticking to the same high quality standards. And that's going to be the thing we're all going to be observing with AIIB. And fourthly, I'm really looking forward to co-financing with them. I think we've got a number of projects already in the pipeline now in Central Asia, which we will co-finance this year with AIIB. I'm absolutely confident of that.
Do you think EBRD can have real hard influence at AIIB, at a China-dominated institution?
I don't see why not. I mean, just because one country had the spirit and the idea, but many other shareholders are also involved, of course, doesn't make them impervious to other influences. I think those people who run the AIB, President Jin Liqun downwards, are very open to sharing ideas. Many of them have worked in other international organisations too, so they know what worked, they also know what didn't work, and they will want to work with us in that same spirit. And that's a spirit that I and my staff have towards them too.
And while EBRD is really upping its game, if you like, with regards to China, I know you're also deepening the institution's ties with Japan.
Indeed so. Japan, of course, was one of our founder shareholders back in 1991. And when I arrived as president here, I felt that we needed to do a lot more with Japan for a number of reasons. One was that Japan's interest in Central Asia. So this story that I've given you, this narrative about how we've upped our efforts in Central Asia, some of that has been due to Japanese prompting and pushing and support for that. They've been a strong advocate of doing more in the poorer Central Asian countries, and I'm very grateful for that. Secondly, I felt that business development with Japanese companies at several thousand miles reach is quite difficult to do, because business development requires day in, day out contact with CEOs.
And chemistry.
And so I was very keen, therefore, to open an office in Tokyo to help develop that. We opened a fledgling office about 2 years ago, very small, and now I'm going to Japan in a week's time. I'll be there, and one of the tasks there is to open our new representative office. That will take forward business development in a much bigger way with Japanese companies too. And I would very much like to see also more Japanese staff in EBRD, more Japanese applicants for EBRD posts too, as we up our game in Central Asia in particular, but also Japanese staff that be interested in North Africa, Turkey, Eastern Europe too. So I think a big push generally in Asia to truly do more, and Japan must be at the hub of that.
Now, while it's difficult to argue with the logic of international cooperation, some people will raise concerns about the link up with China. I think in the EBRD's founding principles, the constitution, if you like, it says you bring together multi-party democracies and so on. Was there hesitation about linking up with China because of those issues, or do you think the direction of travel in China is such that there's not too much inconsistency with the principles of the EBRD and your commercial ambitions in China?
Well, I mean, in terms of the length of time it took, the speed from when China applied to when it became a member, I think this was a record virtually. I mean, certainly in my experience, China expressed interest in early August, and it was a full member by mid-January. That is moving. That's really fast work. Now that was because shareholders, it's not the management, the shareholders who agreed to these things. Shareholders thought this was a really good thing to do. Now, in terms of our constitution, as you say, the constitutional part that applies to countries of operation is about multi-party democracy and open market economies. So you can be a shareholder, but as long as you're not a country of operation, that's fine. China, of course, in becoming a shareholder, had to sign up to all the articles of EBRD. So it accepts that is a fundamental motivator for our work in countries of operation.
So to be clear, you can be an investor and a contributor, but you can't be a recipient of loans in that case.
Yes, because Article 1 very clearly states we operate in countries that are committed to and applying the principles of multi-party democracy, political pluralism, and open market economies as well. So clearly that applies to a certain set of countries. And of course, countries don't necessarily arrive at a particular station that says we're now an open market economy and a fully fledged democracy. They're travelling always on that journey, but they have to be committed to that journey as well. And that applies to countries of operation, not to all shareholders.
And I know that here in your London headquarters, you and all your staff, you're gearing up for the 25th anniversary celebrations of the EBRD, which will be here in London. Will we see much Chinese presence here? And what can we look out for during those celebrations, if you like?
Well, it's a fantastic celebration, really. 25 years, a lot achieved, a lot done, but a lot more to do as well. And what I think we've now got is very much a long-term future, because the set of countries we're now operating in, from Casablanca on the Atlantic coast through to Mongolia, is...
It's a big footprint.
It's a big footprint. Three continents we're in, really. Very heterogeneous set of economies, but all with great development needs and transition needs. So a lot to do, and China will be a fundamental part of that. I think you can expect Chinese interest in the annual meeting. I think great Chinese presence will be there as well. Just to give you a taster for that, I mean, we've had a couple of major business forums in January, February. I mean, one in Istanbul for Central Asia, one here for the Western Balkans, here in the headquarters, and Chinese investors were involved in both. So that just shows you how the interest is being ramped up. I think the 25th anniversary is going to be another one of those occasions.
When I think how recently I was writing articles about the 25th anniversary of the Berlin Wall falling,
yes,
and now here we are very quickly celebrating the 25th anniversary of the EBRD, it does take me back to just how quickly the organisation was set up.
Yes, it was.
Back in the day when communism toppled and the wall came down.
Yes, itself. I mean, the only other process that almost rivals the Chinese membership was the speed at which EBRD was set up. I mean, really from 1990 through to 91, just over a year and a half's worth of work, very, very fast. I was actually at the opening ceremony of the EBRD, so it's actually something for many of us personally, certainly for me, that 25 years on, we've got a really successful bank, but with a huge agenda ahead of us still.
Here's to the next 25 years.
I hope
Mr.
so.
Chakrabarty.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.